Okay, so the endocrine system is responsible for the secretion of hormones. And the endocrine system makes a lot of sense for the endocrine system to be immediately after the nervous system because there are neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters are hormones, aren't they? They are found inside vesicles, bubbles, balloons. You remember the neuromuscular junction and how in the neuromuscular junction you have in the end of the synaptic terminal, you have these vesicles, and the vesicles are full of neurotransmitters. And then these neurotransmitters are going to bind to postsynaptic receptors. They're going to bind to postsynaptic receptors after they fuse with the membrane and they bind to the postsynaptic. So this is the synapse. This is the synapse. This is the presynaptic terminal. And this is the postsynaptic terminal. So the binding of the neuroreceptor that is released from the presynaptic terminal, that's a neuron. And that's a muscle, for example. That's why they call it the neuromuscular junction. So the binding of this neurotransmitter to the postsynaptic terminal is going to elicit some postsynaptic responses, like the influx of calcium, and calcium is going to cause the action potentials to propagate down the muscle fiber that leads ultimately to contraction. So that neurotransmitter is an example of a hormone, but not every hormone is a neurotransmitter. So the biggest category is the hormones. So there are different kinds of hormones, but some hormones happen to be neurotransmitters. So every neurotransmitter is a hormone, but not every single hormone is a neurotransmitter. So the endocrine system is going to facilitate for communication. Why are we secreting hormones? We secreting hormones in order to facilitate for communication. That's one example. How we communicate muscle contraction. Other times, we're always concerned with survival. And we said that survival is always based on, you see that figure I drew, we're going to keep coming back to it, which is you're going to have a receptor. You're going to have a receptor that's going to detect a stimulus. The stimulus then is going to be carried with what kind of neuron? What kind of neuron that's going to carry the information from the receptor? Excellent. That's an afferent. That's an afferent neuron. And the afferent neuron is carrying what kind of input? It is carrying an input. Excellent. That is sensory. And it's going to terminate where in your central nervous system. Central nervous system is a big word for what? For brain and the spinal cord. So your central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord, and there's going to be integration, transduction. What is transduction? Is the conversion of sensory energy or sensory information into a motor output. Then we're going to be generating an output that is motor through what kind of neuron? That's an efferent neuron. Excellent. And the efferent neuron is going to leave from the central nervous system, and the destination is going to be an effector. Excellent. The destination is going to be an effector. And effectors are either glands glands, we will see today, they're either glands or organs. So they are the ones who are going to be doing the effect. You know, when you call 911, the effectors are either ambulance, fire truck, or police. But in your body, the effectors are either glands. There's so many glands. We're gonna learn today in the endocrine system, so many glands. On organs, there you all know our organs and organ systems. This is really important. You have to know that. You have to know the destination, the trip. Where you start, the airport you take off from, New York, Chicago. So an afferent neuron is carrying receptor input sensory information to the central nervous system. That's a complete answer now. An efferent neuron is carrying a output motor stimulation from the central nervous system to the effector, which is either a gland or an organ. Okay, so now the body has four principal mechanisms of communication. So how are these different neurons going to spread? How are these different hormones going to be spread out? Some hormones, they have to be spilled in blood because they're gonna go a very long distance. Like the thyroid hormone is gonna be secreted from the thyroid hormone and target all tissues. Gonna be targeting all tissues in your body. So it needs the bloodstream. You know, you need to take the subway. You're gonna go really far, you have to take the subway. But sometimes gap junctions, these are pores in the cell membrane. These are like doors. You see that door? Imagine there's another classroom. You open the door and you slide right through it. So that's a modality of one of the modalities of the spreading and the mechanisms of communication between cells. You know, cells, they are making up a tissue. You know, multiple cells are making up a tissue. And these cells, they need to talk to each other. Cells need to communicate with one another. They need to be able to talk to each other. So they talk to each other in different ways. Either by opening the door and just electrolytes are flowing through. What's an example of a gap junction? So these are two cells. Cell number one. Cell number one, okay. Purple is done. Okay, so that's cell number one. I think blue is done too. And that's cell number two. A gap junction is a door right there in the middle between cell number one and cell number two. What is gonna flow through this? That's why they call, you know, from the name gap, it's a gap junction. So this gap is gonna allow for the transfer and the passage of what? Electrolytes, hormones, nutrition, waste, stuff that needs to be removed. Then the second thing is neurotransmitter, and we talked about that. Neurotransmitter has to involve a neuron somehow. That's why they call it neurotransmitter. And it's released from a neuron, and it can target another neuron, or it can target another muscle. So there is a neuron-neuron junction, and there is a neuron-muscle junction. Neuromuscular junction, neuron-neuron junction. Paracrines, these are hormones that are made and they are secreted into the tissue fluids to affect nearby cells. So the difference between gap junctions and paracrines is that paracrines, they send their mode of communication by going to nearby cells. So one cell, for example, that's cell number one, and that is cell number two, that is cell number three. If cell number one, that's the receptor on the surface of two, receptor on the surface of one, that's a receptor on the surface of cell number three. If you're secreting a hormone that goes to a nearby cell, and a nearby, that's an example of paracrine signaling. You're not utilizing gap junctions, you're utilizing the extracellular receptors or maybe intercellular receptor, but you're not utilizing a gap or a door. That's a paracrine. And hormones, the hallmark of hormones is that they have to be secreted into the blood stream. That's an example of an endocrine hormone, as opposed to exocrine hormone. What's the difference between endocrine hormone and exocrine hormone? Endocrine hormone is secreted in the blood, while exocrine hormone or exocrine enzyme is not secreted in the blood. It's secreted in a duct or a tunnel. An example of that is going to be your pancreas. See, the pancreas is a gland that is 2 in 1. The pancreas is a gland that happens to be 2 in 1. It's an endocrine and an exocrine gland, 2 in 1. Endocrine and exocrine gland. So the pancreas is an endocrine and it's an exocrine gland, 2 in 1. So what does that mean? This is your pancreas. What does that mean? It means that the endocrine part is going to secrete hormones where? Into the bloodstream. Excellent. Bloodstream. But the exocrine part is going to be secreting its content into where? Into a duct. An example of a hormone that is secreted from the pancreas in the blood is insulin. When blood sugar is too high, then the pancreas secretes in the blood the endocrine hormone insulin. If the blood sugar drops, then the pancreas is going to secrete glucagon in the bloodstream. But if you're eating lipids, you're having a steak meal, well, the pancreas is also helping your digestive system by secreting into your intestine, not in the bloodstream, into the intestine through a duct, a tunnel between your pancreas and your intestine. It's secreting through this tunnel some digestive enzymes known as pancreatic digestive enzymes like lipase. Pancreatic lipase, from the name, lipase, that's to digest lipids, or pancreatic amylase, and amylase is to, if lipase is going to be digesting lipids, what do you think amylase is going to be digesting? Amino acids. That's peptidases. That's going to be carbohydrates. That's to digest carbohydrates. But we will see. So, but the point for now is that you should see that hormones are either secreted into the blood or a duct. Now, these glands, you really have to know them. You have to know where your glands are. The pineal gland and the thymus, these are 2 glands that are very special because they undergo something known as involution. Involution. What is involution? Involution is a big word for shrinking. So you are born with huge pineal gland. You're born with huge thymus gland. But as you get older, they really shrink. So the pineal gland is responsible for what? Pineal gland is responsible for secreting a hormone, melatonin. Melanin is the skin. Melanin is the sunscreen for your cells. Okay, because the ultraviolet radiation is going to cause a mutation in your DNA. So your cell is secreting constantly melanin to put shades. Sometimes you wear shades, sunglasses from the sun. So the melanin is like the sunglass, the shades that your skin wear to block the sun ultraviolet radiation from damaging and causing DNA mutation. That's melanin. Melatonin is for sleeping. That is secreted by the pineal gland. So that's why babies have a huge pineal gland. That's why they're always sleeping. The elderly, however, they're always up. They have a problem sleeping. Why? Because their pineal gland underwent what? Involution. Excellent. What about the thymus? It also undergoes involution. But what is the thymus? The thymus is where the T cells mature. T cells from the immune system. So you're going to learn in the immune system that you have a specialized combat cells. Once the infected microbes, the bacteria, the parasites, the fungi, the viruses enter, you have two types of cells, the B cells and the T cells. B cells mature in the bone marrow. That's why we call them B cells. And T cells mature where? In the thymus. So that's why the elderly, when their thymus shrink, what happens to their immunity? It decreases. That's why they're sick all the time. So you need to find out where the pineal gland is, what does it do, where the thymus gland is, and what does it do. Also, we have the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Oh, that pituitary gland is very, very important. They call it the master gland. It is the gland that regulates hormone secretion from other glands. So you have a gland that tells other glands what to do. And they're all communicating by hormones. So we will see that the hallmark of your endocrine system is the axis. So what's an axis? An axis, this was the hallmark of the nervous system. Nervous system is all about this. Receptor, input sensory afferent neuron, central nervous system, then an output. That is your nervous system. But your endocrine system does not look like that. Your endocrine system looks like this. A, B, C, and a backward arrow. Now that looks like a treasure map. It really makes no sense, but it's gonna make a lot of sense in a little bit. How is that? You're gonna see that A is a gland that's gonna tell B, please send a hormone. B is gonna say, okay, I got the signal. Now let me talk to C. And C is gonna say, all right, C is gonna now send its product. Is gonna send its product. And the product is gonna feed back and say, all righty, there is enough of me already. You need to stop telling C to secrete me. So this concept is called feedback. This concept is called feedback concept. Feedback inhibition. So when there is really low product, when we have no product, that's all gonna make sense in a little bit. When we have a little bit of product, when we have no product, and A is gonna tell B to tell C to make a product. Then when we have enough product, the product is gonna go back to A. That is really, really important. The product is gonna go back and tell A to stop secreting it. Sometimes the product is gonna go to both A and B. A and B to tell both. A, stop telling B to secrete anything, and B, stop telling C to secrete anything. That's called bi-loop inhibition. This is one loop. The first loop is to go from product to A, and the second loop is to go from product to B. Some hormones utilize one loop, some hormones utilize two loops, and that's called bi-loop inhibition or uniloop inhibition. We will talk about that. So now we will see in a little bit that A is your hypothalamus. A is your hypothalamus. Hypothalamus. And B is your pituitary. Pituitary gland, the hypothalamus gland, and C is, it could be anything. C could be the thyroid, C could be the thyroid gland, C could be the adrenal gland, C could be the thyroid, the adrenal gland, the parathyroid gland, even the gonads. the testes, the ovaries. So that's the axis. So the axis is going to be always hypothalamus A, pituitary B, and then C. C is going to be the terminal destination that's going to give you the hormone that you need. All of that is going to make sense in a little bit. So now you need to just, for now, look at the forest from far away. And the forest tells you we have a pineal gland, we have a hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and then these guys are the C's. The A and the B are on your brain. A is hypothalamus, B, the pituitary, C are the rest of the guys, like the pituitary, the thyroid, not the pituitary, the thyroid, the thymus. So remember, always, all the time, A is always hypothalamus, B is always pituitary, C depends on what hormone we dealing with. So for example, if I want testosterone, hypothalamus is going to be secreting FSH. It's going to be secreting gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH. Gonadotropin releasing hormone is going to go to B, which is the pituitary. And the pituitary is going to be secreting FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone is going to be causing the synthesis of sperm in males and the synthesis of egg, ova, in the ovaries. If we want testosterone or estrogen for females, we're going to secrete gonadotropin releasing hormone, which is going to stimulate the gonads to secrete. It's going to stimulate the pituitary to secrete LH, and LH is going to cause secretion of testosterone or estrogen. So we will take that step by step. But this figure is just showing you the major glands. You need to know 100% of these glands, all of them. You cannot know what is the adrenal gland. What is the thyroid? I have no idea what that is. No, that one is really important. You know the driver license test where you need to know all the signs. You cannot miss one. If you get 9 out of 10, you fail. That one is like that. You need to know all your glands. You cannot not know one single one of them. Okay, we discussed that exocrine gland versus endocrine gland. Exocrine gland, we utilize duct, while endocrine gland, we utilize the bloodstream. That's most of the important concepts. Okay. Some chemicals function as both hormones and neurotransmitter, depending on what. So, norepinephrine, dopamine, and antidiuretic hormone, these can function as both hormone and a neurotransmitter. Based on what? Based on who they bind. If they bind if they are secreted from a gland, they are a hormone. If they are secreted from a nerve, they are a neurotransmitter. If they bind a terminal, that is, the effector is a gland. If it goes to another gland, it's a hormone. If it goes to another effector nerve, then that makes it a neurotransmitter. So this figure is showing you that the neuron is going to receive stimulation. So that's the nervous system versus the endocrine system. The nervous system is showing you that we receive stimulation from an adjacent neuron. The adjacent neuron is going to send a stimulation to the subsequent neuron, which is going to be able to internalize this information and generate an output. That's the soma, that's the nucleus. And the nerve impulse is going to lead to, you see what's happening here? It's going to lead to the secretion of, you see those little dots? See those little dots here? Those little dots are coming out from the same end of the nerve terminal. And they are going to bind receptors on what? On target tissue cells. So from a nerve to a tissue cell, that's an example of a communication between a neuron and a gland, or a neuron and a effector organ. But if you look at the endocrine system must utilize the subway. It must utilize the bloodstream. So what happens now, you see that, look at where the arrow is pointing to. These little circles, what do they represent? They represent the cells, tissue. So here you see endocrine cells, the arrow is pointing out from the endocrine cells into where? Into the bloodstream. So that's the endocrine stimulation. Then we're gonna take the subway, we're gonna take the bloodstream. Now look at where the arrow is pointing. Before, the arrow was pointing out from the endocrine cells into the bloodstream. But here, the arrow is pointing from the bloodstream into the tissue cells, into the tissue effector cells, the target cells. So that shows you an example of how the pituitary gland, is sending stimulation in the bloodstream to the thyroid gland, and the thyroid gland is sending a thyroid hormone to is sending its product, the thyroid hormone, to the tissue cells. And then the tissue cells are going to receive the thyroid hormone, and thyroid hormone is going to go back and tell hypothalamus, stop making any hormone that leads to my secretion, because now there's enough of me already in the blood. We don't need any more of me. We don't need hyperthyroid hormone. Is that clear? Questions? So the hypothalamus is shaped like a flattened funnel. It forms the floor of the walls of the third ventricle of the brain. And the pituitary gland is suspended from the hypothalamus by a stalk known as the infundibulum stalk. So this shows you that the embryological development of the hypothalamus, and you will have your hypothalamus and then the beginning of the pituitary gland. You see this? This is your pituitary gland that is made up of two glands in one. It looks like that. One is at the back, known as the posterior pituitary. And one is in the front, known as the anterior pituitary. But both of them make up your pituitary gland. Is that clear? The pituitary gland is made up of two in one, posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary. So if I'm gonna draw that here, I'm gonna look like this. Posterior, anterior, posterior, anterior, and that is pituitary gland. Clear? Are we clear? The anterior pituitary actually has another name. It's called the adenohypophysis. The adenohypophysis. The adenohypophysis is the anterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary has another name. It is the neurohypophysis. That's very important to know which one is the neurohypophysis, which one is the adenohypophysis. Okay. So this adenohypophysis, we said, is connected to the hypothalamus. That is the anterior pituitary, and that is the posterior pituitary. We said the anterior pituitary is also known as the adenohypophysis. Close enough. Very good. And the posterior pituitary is known as the neurohypophysis. Very good. Okay, so the adenohypophysis is connected to, remember, that's B. That is B. A is who? Who's A? Excellent. That is the hypothalamus. So what is the law saying? The law is saying that the adenohypophysis, the anterior part, is connected to, and by the way, the anterior part, this figure is not drawn to scale, but it should look like that. So the size of the adenohypophysis is three times the neurohypophysis. So 75% of the pituitary gland is adenohypophysis, while 25% is neurohypophysis. But it's telling you that the hypothalamus is connected to the adenohypophysis by a blood stream, by vasculature, and blood vessel network, capillary system, known as the what? Hypophyseal portal system. Hypophyseal portal system. So if you're asked, what is the hypophyseal portal system? That is the blood vessel system that connects the hypothalamus to the adenohypophysis. So if the hypothalamus is going to send any hormone to the adenohypophysis, it's going to utilize which capillary system? The hypophyseal portal system, or the hypophyseal portal tract. The hypophyseal portal tract or hypophyseal portal system is the system that communicates, that connects the hypothalamus to the which pituitary? There's two pituitaries. There is an anterior pituitary and a posterior pituitary. There's the adenohypophysis and the neurohypophysis. What does the hypophyseal portal system connect the hypothalamus to? The adenohypophysis. Excellent. Another very important point is that what kind of hormones are coming from the hypothalamus to the adenohypophysis? Two types of hormone. The first type of hormone is plus, excitatory, stimulating hormones. Once the stimulating hormones come from the hypothalamus to the pituitary, anterior pituitary, the anterior pituitary is going to be stimulated to secrete something. It's going to be stimulated to secrete something. The other type of hormones are minus, and these are known as inhibitory hormones. So inhibitory hormones, once they bind to the adenohypophysis, what are they going to do? They're going to cause inhibition or stoppage of the release of the hormones. That's very important. There you go. This is our, do you see now? That's our posterior pituitary, and that's our anterior pituitary connected to our hypothalamus. And that shows you, these are the hypothalamic hormones that come from the hypothalamus. The first hormone is GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. That's plus. That stimulate the release from the adenohypophysis. Thyrotropin releasing hormone, plus. That makes stimulation. Corticotropin releasing hormone, that stimulate the release of corticotropin. Prolactin inhibiting hormone, that stops the release of prolactin. Growth hormone releasing hormone, that causes the stimulation of the release of growth hormone. Now, when you arrive to the pituitary gland, you have follicle stimulating hormone. That's gonna now go to C. So that's A. Hypothalamus is A. You go from A to B. Then B is gonna send these guys to C. So follicle stimulating hormone is gonna go to the gonad, make follicles, gonadal follicles. Luteinizing hormone is gonna go to the gonads to cause the secretion of testosterone and estrogen. Thyroid stimulating hormone is gonna go to who's gonna be C, the thyroid gland. Who's gonna be C for adrenocorticotropic hormone? The adrenal gland. Who's gonna be C for prolactin? The milk duct. Who's gonna be C for growth hormone? Your bone to grow. This is very important to know that hypothalamic hormones are coming from A to B. Who's A? Hypothalamus. Who's B? Pituitary. Pituitary hormones are going from B to C. C is the effector. So this guy comes out from the pituitary and it targets the effector. It targets the effectors. Is that clear? So now we gotta hold each one of them. Okay? So gonadotropin releasing hormone. Gonadotropin releasing, so this is A, and this is B, and there's C down here. Everyone has its own A, own B, and own C. So gonadotropin releasing hormone is gonna come from A, it's gonna bind to B. Once gonadotropin releasing hormone, it's very easy to identify hypothalamic hormones because they end with releasing hormone or inhibiting hormone. You see everything releasing hormone, or inhibiting hormone. That's the language of hypothalamus. So gonadotropin, so that's number one. Gonadotropin releasing hormone is gonna bind to B, and once it binds to B, the hypothalamus, B is gonna send either one of these two. Follicle stimulating hormone is gonna go to the testes if you're a male, or go to the gonads if you're a female. And luteinizing hormone also is gonna go to C, which is the gonads. Is the gonads. Is that clear? Now, let's look at another pathway. What about thyrotropin releasing hormone? Let's look at number 2. Thyrotropin releasing thyrotropin releasing hormones. TRH. Thyrotropin releasing hormone is going to leave the hypothalamus, is going to strike B. So we said A is always the hypothalamus. Is that clear? B is always the pituitary. And C is an effector. It's an effector. For TRH, thyrotropin releasing hormone is going to go from hypothalamus to pituitary. Then, once thyrotropin releasing hormone binds pituitary, what's going to happen? Thyroid stimulating hormone is going to bind. So, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, is going to bind to the effector. And the effector here is not going to be the gonad, because this is not gonadotropin. This is thyroid stimulating hormone. Is going to bind where? What is it going to bind? The thyroid gland. Remember we said effectors are always glands or organs. Glands or organs. So this is going to keep happening a lot. Then you have corticotropin releasing hormone. Corticotropin releasing hormone. Corticotropin releasing hormone, CRH, is going to come from hypothalamus to the pituitary. Then the pituitary is going to be sending upon the arrival. So remember, the first step is A binding to B. Corticotropin releasing hormone binds to B. Then, what are we going to have? Adrenocorticotropic hormone, this one. adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. Adrenocorticotropic hormone. Is it gonna bind to the thyroid? Is it gonna bind the thyroid? Is it gonna bind the thyroid? No, it's the adrenal gland. Excellent. It's gonna bind the adrenal gland. And then the adrenal gland is gonna secrete cortisol. Cortisol in the blood for your cells. But you see the trend? You see the treasure map now starting to make sense? That you always begin with number one, the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is going to send some type of releasing hormone or inhibiting hormone, releasing hormone plus, inhibiting hormone minus. And once we arrive to the pituitary, after the arrival, this is like a domino effect. So the pituitary is never going to release anything unless the hypothalamus tells it. So that's step number one. Step number two, then we send a concomitant hormone that the hypothalamus tells you to secrete. Then we go to the effector. The effector is then going to send into the bloodstream the type of hormone. Then the hormone is going to feed back and say, that's it. There's enough of me in blood already. We don't want too much. So now we're going to look at all of these hormones, but now it's like a template. The same way when we did the sense organs, whether you're doing vision, whether you're doing hearing, whether you're doing equilibrium, whether you're doing smell, whether you're doing touch, you're always going to have a receptor. You're always going to have an input sensory afferent stimulation. You're always going to have a projection to the central nervous system. Then you're going to have transduction. Then you're going to have an output, motor stimulation from an efferent neuron. Then an effector is going to carry out the motor effect. That's the template. No matter what sense you're dealing with, you're going to be following that template. Now for the endocrine system, that is the template we're going to follow. A, B, C. What do we call that? Axis. So you're going to see there's a thyroid axis. So that's the gonadal axis. The gonadotropin releasing hormone, follicle, luteinizing hormone, testicles, or ovaries. That's the axis for reproduction. What about the thyroid? It has its own axis now. The thyroid has thyrotropin releasing hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, thyroid hormone. That's the thyroid axis. So everyone has its own axis. No one is going to make the other one. No gonadotropin being secreted and then somehow it makes thyroid release. Impossible. If you want thyroid, you have to follow the thyroid axis all the way at the top, from the hypothalamus to the thyroid gland to the pituitary, then the thyroid. Is that point clear? Okay, so now let's investigate all of these hormones. Okay, so anterior pituitary gland. So this figure here is showing you all of the hormones that come out from the pituitary. So you need to know all the hormones that come out from the hypothalamus, from A, and you need to know all the hormones that come out from the B, the pituitary gland. So this slide is showing you the hormones that come out from B. So for B, do you see the anterior pituitary? You see the blood vessels? You see the blood vessels from the anterior pituitary? So you see this is your hypothalamus is secreting its releasing hormones in the bloodstream. What's the name of this tract? What's the name of this portal system that communicates between the hypothalamus and the pituitary? What do we call that? Yeah, I heard it. I heard it somewhere. The ghost said it. Somebody from outside said it. I heard it here. The hypophyseal portal system. Then once you get to the pituitary, you have the TSH hormone. Then that's, what is TSH? TSH is secreted from B. B secretes TSH. And then TSH is going to go to C, who's the thyroid gland. And the thyroid gland is going to secrete what? The thyroid hormone. So there is a D, A, B, C, D. A, hypothalamus, B, pituitary, C, thyroid, D, the thyroid hormone going to your tissue. ACTH, you have adrenocorticotropic releasing hormone. Then we go to adrenocorticotropic ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. That's going to go to the adrenal gland, adrenal cortex, and it's going to give you the cortisol. Third one, you have GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, A. B is the pituitary gland, who's going to secrete FSH and LH. Then FSH and LH from C are going to go to your gonad, if you are a male, to the testes, or female to the ovaries. And where are they going to secrete? Testosterone for male, estrogen for female, sperm for males, and ova or eggs from the females. Growth hormone. You have growth hormone releasing hormone coming from the hypothalamus from A. Then we're going to go to the pituitary, and we're going to have growth hormone, and then growth hormone is going to go to the bone to make your bones long and make you grow up and develop. Prolactin is going to stimulate the milk duct to make milk for the baby, nutrition. Endorphins, these are the opioid analogs that makes you feel less pain. But is a track, is an axis, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. That's another figure that shows you see the hypothalamus? You see where my mouse is? That's A, the hypothalamus. Then you have B, that is the pituitary gland. And lastly, you have the thyroid. And then thyroid, you see, after you reach the thyroid, it doesn't end there. The thyroid secrete thyroid hormone. So we go through all of this just so we can end up with a hormone. We go all the way up to the hypothalamus so it can give us thyroid releasing hormone. Then we go to the pituitary so it can give us thyroid stimulating hormone. Then we go to the thyroid so it can give us thyroid hormone. So we're doing all of the axis to get these little dots, little red dots, this little orange dot coming from the adrenal cortex, this little blue green dot coming from the gonads, like the ovary, to give us estrogen. So we have a whole axis so we can end up with a product hormone. Is that clear? Look at this. Not intimidating, makes a lot of sense. ACTH is going to go to the adrenal cortex. So who's missing in this diagram? The hypothalamus. So hypothalamus is going to secrete. So you need to get in the habit of knowing your hormones. So if you're going to end up with ACTH, you're going to be secreting adrenocorticotropic releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. Is going to go to the anterior pituitary and cause anterior pituitary to secrete adrenocorticotropic hormone. Then adrenocorticotropic hormone is going to go where? To the adrenal gland. Then adrenal gland is going to secrete who? Cortisol. Excellent. GH, growth hormone releasing hormone, is going to be secreted from who? A, the hypothalamus. Excellent. Then it's going to bind to receptors on the anterior pituitary, and the anterior pituitary is going to secrete growth hormone, which is going to go to the bones and muscle to make you bigger and going to make you grow. How about gonadotropin releasing hormone? Is going to come from the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is going to secrete gonadotropin releasing hormone, which then going to go into the anterior pituitary if you're a male or female, FSH and LH are going to be secreted, but your effector target cells are going to be different. If you're a male, it's going to go to your testes. You see FSH and LH are going to go to the testes, but if you're female, you see here, FSH and LH go to the ovaries. Then the ovaries secrete ova or estrogen. Excellent. And the testes secrete testosterone or sperm. Excellent. Very good. The thyroid. Thyrotropin releasing hormone comes from A, the hypothalamus. Then B. What comes out of B when thyrotropin releasing hormone arrive? You know the Olympics, they pass on the torch. One pass the torch to somebody else. So the same thing. Gonadotropin releasing hormone comes from the hypothalamus, pass the torch to the anterior pituitary. What's the anterior pituitary going to secrete? TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone is going to go to the thyroid and it's going to release thyroid hormone. Prolactin is going to go to the mammary gland, and antidiuretic hormone is going to go to your adrenal cortex and cause the secretion of ADH, which is going to reabsorb water. Okay, we're going to go into their details. Now, the posterior pituitary is not called the adenohypophysis. The posterior pituitary is not called the adenohypophysis. What is it called? The neurohypophysis. Why is it called the neurohypophysis? Because it's a collection of nerve tissues. Nerve tissues is not blood vessels. And the posterior pituitary is actually a warehouse. It's a warehouse. It's a storage site. So the hypothalamus makes these hormones and they store them there. They are released when they're needed. But it's not like the anterior pituitary, the adenohypophysis, where you actually have to make them there. They are already made. They are microwaved. They're just ready to be microwaved and sent out. They're pre-cooked, pre-stored in the posterior pituitary. You see? So now we're not dealing with anterior no more. We finished all the anterior pituitary hormones. Now we're going to look at the posterior pituitary hormones. How many posterior pituitary hormones are there? 2. Just 2. Not like all of the other guys in the anterior pituitary. So there's an anterior pituitary gland that makes many hormones like the TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, corticotropic hormone, the LH, the FSH. But the posterior pituitary makes only 2 hormones. What are they? Oxytocin and ADH. What does ADH stand for? Always digging holes. It does that, but that's not what it's called. It's called antidiuretic hormone. So from the name, what's an antidiuretic hormone? From the name, antidiuretic. So he's anti doing what? Yeah, the opposite or the preventer or the inhibitor of diuresis. What is diarrhea? You know, diarrhea is when you have diarrhea, but this is not anti-diarrhea. This is anti-diuresis. So what is diuresis? It's not diarrhea. Urination. How could antidiuretic hormone be useful? What would we need something to stop us from urine? I thought it's good to urinate, get all the toxic waste out. Excellent. So when you're already dehydrated, you're running a marathon, it's too hot. The water in your blood is so little. So in addition to that, does it make sense you go urinate? You're already dehydrated and you go urinate? It doesn't make sense. So that's when ADH is secreted. Antidiuretic to prevent you from urinating. And there's also anti-saliva. Nobody is thirsty, going to be urinating. Nobody who is thirsty is going to be having a saliva. Somebody who is thirsty is not going to be able to spit at anybody because there's going to be a complete shutdown of salivation. We talked about this in the taste lecture. We said that if you're dehydrated, you have dry mouth, are you going to be able to taste the food? Because there's complete loss of salivation. You cannot salivate. Why can you not salivate? Because salivation does have enzymes. Saliva does have enzymes. Saliva does have electrolytes, but majorly it's water. You want to clear your throat after running a marathon? You cannot, because you cannot spit anything out. You want to get something out your nose after running a marathon? It's not going to work because you're too dehydrated. You shut down completely. Urination, shut down completely. Salivation, and nobody's going to be crying after running a marathon, no matter how sad the situation is, because complete shutdown of tearing. You're not going to be able to cry. You're not going to be able to salivate. You're not going to be able to urinate, to preserve the water, because we don't want hypovolemia. We don't want a complete severe drop in blood volume. So there are 8 hormones produced in the hypothalamus. We talked about those. 8 hormones in the hypothalamus: gonadotropin, thyrotropin, corticotropin, prolactin, growth hormone releasing hormone, somatostatin. And 2 are released and stored. Remember the warehouse, the microwave, they're already prepared and they are stored where? In the posterior pituitary. Who are they? Antidiuretic hormone. What's the other one? Oxytocin. What's oxytocin? Oxytocin is the squeezer. It squeezes the milk duct. So when the baby is suckling the nipple of the mom, the suckling of the nipple from the mom is going to irritate the nerve endings in the nipple, and that's going to go up to the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is going to say, oh, this baby needs milk. So it's going to secrete oxytocin, the squeezer. Oxytocin is the squeezer. It's going to squeeze the milk duct, and all the milk is going to flow for the baby. So the more the baby suckling the nipple, the more milk come out. Why? Because the nerve ending is going to be sending all the electrical action potential to the hypothalamus. You see here, baby is suckling the mechanoreceptor in the nipple. Mechanoreceptor stimulating the what do mechanoreceptors detect? Mechanical stimulation. Yeah. So when the baby suckling the nipple, moving the mechanoreceptor, input signal, sensory signal, afferent neurons going where? Hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is sending out efferent neuron motor output. Who's going to be carrying this motor output? Oxytocin. So oxytocin is going to go. Who's going to be the effector here? The milk duct in the breast. And the milk is going to come out. So the more the baby suckle the milk, the more oxytocin come out, the more milk squeeze. The more the baby suckles the milk, the more oxytocin coming out, the more milk we squeezing. Does oxytocin only squeeze milk duct? Is that the only thing that oxytocin gonna squeeze? Milk duct? No. What about the uterus? So when the baby is coming out in labor, in birth, and the baby is pushing against the walls of the uterus in the cervix, when the baby is stretching the cervix, what kind of receptors are detecting the stretching of the cervix? Mechanoreceptors. Excellent. It's not hard to tell what kind of receptor. Is it light? That's photoreceptor. Is it some chemical in the periodic table? Oxygen, glucose, carbohydrate? Is it some form of a chemical? That's a chemoreceptor. Is it detecting water balance? That's an osmoreceptor. Is it detecting pain? That's an nociceptor. Is it detecting mechanical stimulation? That's the mechanoreceptor. So if it's detecting the baby struggling the milk, the nipple, or the baby pushing against the cervix, that's an example of a mechanoreceptor. So the mechanoreceptor is gonna tell the brain, hypothalamus, this baby is trying to be born. The baby is pushing against the cervix, trying to get out. So the hypothalamus says, okay, I'll send oxytocin. So oxytocin is gonna go to the uterus and push the baby out some more. So the baby pushes and the cervix push some more. The baby push, cervix push some more, until the baby is all out. So that squeezing in the milk duct, the squeezing in the cervix is thanks to who? Oxytocin, which comes from where? The hypothalamus. Excellent. Students say it comes from the posterior pituitary. No, it does not. It gets stored there. It's the warehouse. It gets microwaved there, but it's made in the hypothalamus. When we need it, it comes from the microwave, it comes from the warehouse, from the storage site, the posterior pituitary, but it's not made there.
It's an anti-diuretic hormone also coming.
Exactly. The antidiuretic hormone, when is the antidiuretic hormone secreted? We discussed that. When is the antidiuretic hormone released? Yeah, when we're dehydrated, because it's gonna be antidiuresis. Okay, no bathroom, no urination, because you're not gonna be able to urinate because you're already too dehydrated. So all these mnemonics, flat peg, to help you remember, the anterior pituitary hormone, F for FSH, L for LH, A for, I don't like mnemonics because I want you to understand it. You don't have to just memorize it. Mnemonics just help you memorizing. We don't want memorization, we want understanding. So, there are 6 releasing and inhibiting hormones that stimulate the inhibition or the stimulation of the anterior pituitary. So thyrotropin releasing hormone goes to thyroid stimulating hormone to give us thyroid hormone. Okay. These are the 2 hypothalamic hormones, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. Both are stored and released in the posterior pituitary. Okay, anterior lobe of the pituitary synthesizes and releases 6 hormones. 2 of them, remember, we said when we're dealing with biology, we have 2 purposes, either survival or reproduction. Same thing. We have many hormones to help us survive, and we have follicle stimulating. Does follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone help us survive? Think about it. Do they help us survive? Where do they go? Where do FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone, where do they terminate? Where do they go to? What's their destination? The gonads. So if they're going to go to the gonads, are they for survival or for reproduction? For reproduction. So 2 are for reproduction, and the rest, the other 6 are for survival, like the thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic. So now you need to know what the thyroid stimulating hormone is going to secrete, thyroid hormone. What about ACTH? So you need to know where ACTH comes from. Where does ACTH come from? It doesn't have releasing hormone next to it, so it's not coming from the hypothalamus. It's very easy to tell which hormone is coming from the hypothalamus because it always ends with releasing hormone plus, or if you're coming from the hypothalamus, you will always end with a hormone that's releasing hormone. Gonadotropin, releasing hormone. Corticotropic, releasing hormone. Growth hormone, releasing hormone. prolactin inhibiting hormone. So if you end with that suffix, you are from the hypothalamus. Now look at adrenocorticotropic hormone. Does it end with releasing hormone? Does it end with inhibitory hormone? So it's not coming from the hypothalamus. Then where else could it be coming from? From the pituitary, the anterior pituitary, to be very precise. Excellent. Prolactin stimulates mammary glands to synthesize milk. Where does it come from? Posterior. Posterior. We said the posterior only secrete two: the squeezer, oxytocin. So oxytocin is important for milk ejection, squeezing, but the actual genesis, the making of the milk, is by prolactin, lactation. So prolactin makes the milk. Oxytocin ejects it, squeezes it. So the one that makes the milk is from the anterior pituitary. The one that squeezes the milk is the posterior pituitary. Growth hormone stimulates mitosis and cellular differentiation to enter the cell cycle. This figure is important. So we see again, A, B, the C. So who's A? Hypothalamus. Who's B? Pituitary. Who's C? As my effector. Let's begin one by one. There are four different colored arrows. You see them. That one, you see where my mouse is? There's a yellow colored arrow, green colored arrow, blue colored arrow, purple colored arrow. So that represents an axis. Let's begin with the first axis. What is the first axis? TRH. What is that? TRH. Excellent. It ends with an RH. It ends with an RH, releasing hormone. So you know it's coming from where? And it is indeed. Thyrotropin releasing hormone going to the anterior pituitary. And once the thyrotropin releasing hormone hit the pituitary, it has two targets. What are the two targets? The first one is the thyroid gland. TSH is going to go to the thyroid gland, and prolactin is going to go to the mammary gland for milk. Green arrow. Green arrow is gonadotropin releasing hormone. And gonadotropin releasing hormone is going to cause the anterior pituitary to release LH and FSH. And LH and FSH are going to be going to testes and ovaries. Blue, corticotropin releasing hormone and adrenocorticotropic hormone from the adrenal cortex. And growth hormone is going to go to the liver or to the muscle. Gonadotropin, the growth hormone is going to go to the muscle to cause growth, or the liver to secrete insulin growth factor, which also participates in growth. Yes. Yeah. So remember, what did I say last week about the meaning of the word cortex? Cortex and medulla. When we said the brain has a cortex and the medulla oblongata. What is that terminology? Cortex, medulla. What is that? Excellent. Very good. So cortex is always at the top, at the roof. So the adrenal cortex is at the roof of the gland, while the adrenal medulla is in the core, is in the bottom. The adrenal medulla secrete what? The adrenal medulla secretes the epinephrine, the norepinephrine, the fight or flight hormones, while the adrenal cortex itself is separated into three different layers, and we will see what they are in a little bit. Posterior pituitary, oxytocin, antidiuretic hormone. And we said antidiuretic hormone is also known as vasopressin because it's going to cause vasoconstriction to prevent loss of urine, and is also going to increase water retention, reabsorption of water. And why they call it vasopressin? Because it constricts the blood vessels to prevent loss of water. oxytocin. We talked about this inhibition that once, for example, look here, thyrotropin releasing hormone is going to cause the anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone. Then the thyroid hormone is going to be secreted from the thyroid gland to the target organs. And what do we have here? It's going to go back up and say, that's it. There's enough of me already. So you see the red going, putting minus, applying brake. And we said when there is two of them, how many loops are those? There's a bi-loop inhibition. So that means the thyroid hormone is going to go up to the thyroid hormone is going to go up to the anterior pituitary to say, no more TSH, please. And it's going to go up to the hypothalamus and say, no more. No more TRH. There you go. Excellent. So the thyroid hormone is going to block the both. The thyroid is going to block the anterior pituitary from secreting TSH, and is going to block the hypothalamus from secreting TRH. That's the inhibition. Positive feedback, we talked about that. Stretching of the uterus and the milk ejection also is going to cause this stimulation of the oxytocin. Any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Pineal gland, we talked about that. Sleeping, melatonin. Thymus, we said it's important for the maturation of the T cells. What does that tell you? Involution. That's a newborn baby. Look at how huge the thalamus was. Look at how huge the thalamus now. So it underwent what process? Involution. Excellent. No. Yeah, that's just good noticing, but no, it doesn't change color. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, it looks like it did, but maybe it did. I don't even know.
I mean, over here, that looks like red, over there, yellow.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. You are definitely right. Thyroid gland is the largest gland that is purely endocrine. It's gonna be secreting hormones T4 and T3. And you see it is very highly vascularized. If you get a thyroid biopsy, it's very fine. They call it fine needle, not even a biopsy. Because if they just touch the thyroid, it bleeds really, really heavily. It bleeds extremely heavily. So because it's highly vascularized, you see all of these veins and arteries. The parathyroid gland, what does it secrete? The parathyroid hormone. So that's important, actually. That's very important. Okay. So now let's talk about these different glands. This is calcium homeostasis. Calcium homeostasis. In calcium homeostasis, if there's too much calcium, what is that known as? If there's so much calcium, we said when something is too much, that's an example of hypercalcemia. We don't want we don't want hypocalcemia. What do we want? Eucalcemia, normal eucalcemia. We want eucalcemia. So now, too much calcium What is gonna be sent? An input, sensory stimulation through a afferent neuron. That's gonna go to the thyroid gland. Gonna go to the parathyroid gland. If there is too much, so we secrete the parathyroid gland, we secrete parathyroid hormone from the name, parathyroid hormone, parathyroid gland. But if we have too much calcium, we don't secrete it from the parathyroid, we secrete it from the thyroid gland. Thyroid gland looks like a bow tie. It's right in front of the neck. It's like a bow tie. That's known as the thyroid gland. And the thyroid gland, as a result, when there's so much calcium, is going to be secreting a hormone that's going to be the output. Output, efferent neuron. That's the output, that's the motor output. Thyroid gland. And they're going to secrete an output motor efferent neuron. And it's going to secrete a hormone known as calcitonin. What is calcitonin going to do? That's a hormone, calcitonin hormone. What is calcitonin going to do? Calcitonin is going to take all of this extra, all of this too much calcium, and dump it in the bones. And when you dump calcium into the bone, what's going to happen to the overall calcium in blood? It's going to be taking calcium from blood. You know, there's too much calcium in blood, in the blood vessels, in the bloodstream. That's where the hypercalcemia happened. Where was the hypercalcemia? In the blood. So we're going to be taking the too much calcium from the blood, we dump it in the bone to make the bone heavy with calcium. And then what's going to happen to the overall level of the calcium is going to go up or down? It's going to go down. Then we're going to achieve eucalcemia. And when we achieve eucalcemia, what's going to happen? The release of it's going to feed back into the thyroid gland. It's going to stop the release of calcitonin. Negative feedback. That's called negative feedback. To stop any more release of calcitonin. Is that clear? Is that clear? What about the opposite? So are we only concerned with having too much calcium? What if there's too little calcium now? If there's too little calcium, minus, what do we call that? If too much calcium is hypercalcemia, too little calcium is what? That's hypocalcemia. Hypocalcemia is going to send a signal input, sensory, afferent signal into the parathyroid gland, which are like 4 buttons in the back of the, what's the name of these 4 buttons in the back of the thyroid gland? These are the parathyroid glands. Then the parathyroid gland are going to secrete as a motor efferent response. They're going to secrete the hormone PTH. What does PTH stand for? Parathyroid hormone. And what is parathyroid hormone going to do? Excellent. It's going to go to the bone and it's going to start degrading calcium. It's going to activate osteoclast. Osteoclast, these are bone degrading, bone breaking, bone degrading cells. Are we clear? And then they're gonna deplete the bone, and then they're gonna sprinkle calcium from the bone into the bloodstream, which is gonna restore the levels of calcium. Are we clear? What are these 4 buttons in the back of the thyroid gland known as? Parathyroid. Now we finished with the thyroid and the parathyroid. What do we have next? The adrenal gland. You see, the adrenal gland, if you look at it, the adrenal gland is divided into the adrenal gland is divided into 2 compartments, the roof and the medulla. This whole part here is known as the cortex, and the middle part is the medulla. The cortex is further divided into 3 dotted regions. 1, 2, 3. The region that is at the topmost, you see it here? If you look here, that's the medulla. The medulla is in the core. And on the outside is the adrenal cortex. The cortex is divided into 3 layers. You see them? 3 layers, 3 zones. The zone that is at the roof, the farthest, is known as the zona glomerulosa. That is the zona glomerulosa. The middle is known as the zona fasciculata. And the one that is almost at the top of the medulla is known as the zona reticularis. Glomerulosa, from the word, the Latin word glomerular, which means ball. So under the microscope, histologically, they look like round circular balls. The zona fasciculata, it means sticks. So under the microscope, that region looks like 6 bundles, 6. The reticularis looks like a net under the microscope. Do you see here? That the zona glomerulosa looks like balls. Zona fasciculata looks like sticks, and the zona reticularis looks like net. And deeper to all of that is your adrenal medulla. We said the adrenal medulla secretes what? The adrenal medulla secretes epinephrine, norepinephrine. What does the zona glomerulosa secrete? Zona glomerulosa secretes mineral corticoids. Mineral corticoids, such as aldosterone. The zona fasciculata, they secrete glucocorticoids like cortisol. And the zona reticularis secrete gonadocorticoids. You have to know that. So now let's look at that in details. So the adrenal medulla, we said it has the sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for sympathetic nervous system, is responsible for the release of the catecholamines, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. You see, you see where my mouse is? When stimulated, the adrenal medulla releases catecholamines, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. What did we say last lecture? Talking about how these hydrophilic, how do these hydrophilic catecholamines enter the cell? First messenger or second messenger? Second messenger. What's the name of the second messenger? Excellent. What is it? Yes, cyclic AMP. That's the second messenger. So the second messenger is responsible for, relaying the effects of the norepinephrine. But what about those are the adrenal medulla hormones? They need a second messenger. What about the adrenal cortex? Do they need a second messenger? They don't. Why not? Because they are made from cholesterol. They are hydrophobic. They're not hydrophilic. So they dissolve in the plasma membrane. There we go. Zona glomerulosa secretes who? Mineral corticoid. Mineral corticoids such as aldosterone. Zona fasciculata secretes the cortisol. And the zona reticularis is gonna secrete the sex steroids. How they secrete sex steroids? Is the adrenal cortex a gonad? So why does it secrete sex? Now that why females have testosterone. They used to confuse the scientists. Females don't have testes. How come there's a little bit of testosterone in their blood? And men, they don't have an ovary. We still have a little bit of estrogen in our blood. Where it's coming from? There. From the zona reticularis of the adrenal cortex, secreting sex steroids. The one that you're not supposed to have. That's how we have it. So why do some females have testosterone? Because even though they have an ovary that makes estrogen, the testosterone is made by the zona reticularis of the adrenal cortex. Then the scientists were happy. The confusion is gone. What explains why men have some estrogen, even though they have a testes, no ovary, is because the zona reticularis. Mineral corticoids, aldosterone. Glucocorticoids, ACTH, is gonna secrete cortisol, and cortisol is going to be responsible for giving you energy for survival. So that's why cortisol is a stress hormone, Cortisol is a stress hormone, and it's secreted for your survival. We talked about insulin. So remember when we described the difference between a duct, between an endocrine gland and exocrine gland? So look at the pancreas. The pancreas empties its content that is heading to the digestive system through a what? You see where my mouse is? Through a duct. So that's an exocrine gland. But if you're sending it through a gland, that's an endocrine gland. Glucagon is secreted by alpha cells. And it is secreted when there is too little glucose. So now that's the opposite. When you have a drop in glucose, that is hypoglycemia. We don't say hypoglucosemia, hypoglycemia. When there is hypoglycemia, we send information to the pancreas, and the pancreas is gonna send an output known as glucagon. And glucagon is gonna restore increase. It's gonna go to the liver, and it's gonna cause the release of glucose from the liver into the blood. And that's gonna restore the euglycemia. The euglycemia. What about the opposite? What if you now have too much? So now that's no longer hypoglycemia. What is that now? That's hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia is going to cause the pancreas to secrete insulin. And insulin is going to cause the uptake of glucose from the blood into the muscle or from the blood into the liver, and that's going to deplete glucose level to restore euglycemia. Clear? Insulin is secreted by B or beta cells, and it's secreted when there is an excess of glucose. Somatostatin is secreted by delta cells, and the pancreas also has P peptides and G cells of an unknown function. It's not important. Gonads. We have ovarian hormones and testicular hormones. Ovarian hormones, these are coming from the ovaries. Ovarian hormones are secreted from the ovary. These are estradiol, progesterone, and inhibin, while testicular hormones dirty now. Testicular hormones secrete testosterone, weaker androgens, and estrogen. Okay, so we discussed that the FSH is coming from where? FSH and LH. Excellent. And then they're gonna terminate at the gonads. Then when the gonads receive FSH and LH, they're gonna secrete, if you are a male, what are they gonna secrete? And sperm, making the sperm. Synthesis of testosterone and synthesis of the sperm. Ovaries, synthesis of estrogen and synthesis of eggs, ova. This renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system is very important because it is able to restore blood pressure when there is a severe drop. When there is a drop in blood pressure, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, we will get to that when we're doing the blood circulation next week. So we're going to be talking about, that's another axis. Renin-angiotensin, it's called the RAS, RAAS, renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, and it's triggered by a drop in blood pressure. So now we have hypotension. Then that's going to cause the renin to be secreted from the kidney. Renin is going to convert angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 is going to go to your lung, and the lung is going to convert. There's an enzyme there called ACE. ACE is angiotensin converting enzyme. It's going to take angiotensin 1, convert it into angiotensin 2, and angiotensin 2 is going to prevent the loss of water in urine, is going to cause vasoconstriction so that it can increase the vascular resistance, increase the blood pressure, and it's going to make you thirsty so you can go drink more water. So that system, the RAS, RAAS, renin-angiotensin aldosterone system, is for your survival against a drop in blood pressure. There's another one, the opposite. When you have too high blood pressure now, that's known as the barrow reflex. That one is gonna relax and bring down your heart rate. But this one is gonna bring up your heart rate. So your reflex is always gonna be for your survival, depending on your sensation. Are we sensing a drop in calcium? We're gonna increase calcium. Are we sensing an increase in calcium? Then we're gonna decrease calcium secretion. Are we sensing an increase in blood pressure? We're gonna cause barrow reflex. Are we dropping the blood pressure? Then we're going to be initiating this reflex of the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. Steroids. Okay, these are the steroids. They always, if you see this 4-ring, once you see this 4-ring, you bet that's what? Cholesterol. So that shows you testosterone, all of these hormones are based on what? Cholesterol. Steroids are based on 4-ring. How many rings does cholesterol have? 4 rings. But if you look at these monoamines, these guys, they're not, this is hydrophobic. This is insanely hydrophobic. This is never dissolving in water. These 4 rings. But look at these guys. Is that hydrophobic? No, that's hydrophilic. So those thyroxine and the epinephrine, they're hydrophilic. So which one need a second messenger? The cholesterol-based hydrophobic or the water-based hydrophilic hormones? The cholesterol-based hydrophobic hormones. They need, which one need a second messenger? Which one need a second messenger? A second messenger means you cannot enter the cell. So you need somebody else on your behalf. You need cyclic AMP to go and do the job on your behalf. So why can you not enter the cell? What is the cell membrane made up of? Lipid. So if you can't enter through the lipid, that means you're lipid or it means you're non-lipid. You know, likes dissolve like. Birds of the same feather flock together. If the plasma membrane is lipid, who can enter through the plasma membrane? Other lipids only. I'm lipid, nobody going through me except lipid. So is steroids lipid or not? Steroids are lipid because they are hydrophobic. They don't dissolve in water. Lipids don't dissolve in water. So the plasma membrane is going to say, welcome. You can go right through me like a ghost. They go right through the plasma membrane. So testosterone doesn't need a second messenger. It goes right through the lipid membrane. Estrogen doesn't need a second messenger, goes right through the lipid membrane. Progesterone doesn't need a second messenger, goes right through the lipid membrane. But epinephrine, thyroxine, that is not lipid. That dissolves in water. So it's going to bind to a receptor. What's the name of the receptor? G protein link receptor. Remember, G protein link receptors are going to cause the secretion of the cyclic AMP. So some hormones are inactive and they get activated when we cleave them. And this is the synthesis of the thyroid hormone. We need iodine. So, you know, people who live in villages that rely on water from the well. So their system, they purify water that is taken from well, not water that is taken from a river or is taken from the sea. What's the difference? So if you're taken from the sea, that's iodide salt. So you have no problem with thyroid making it, because iodine is important for making thyroid hormone. But if they live in the village and they rely on water that's taken from the well, that comes from the rain, Rain doesn't have salt on it. So they drink water that does not have iodine. So they always have a problem making a thyroid hormone. So they need to take salt that is iodized salt. They sell it to them in the stores, in Walmart.
So I think it's like people don't drink seawater though.
Yeah, they purify it, but there's still some remnants. Yeah, you don't drink the seawater, you purify it, but there's still some remnant iodine. But that one from the well, it has no salt because it comes from up there. It doesn't come from the minerals that are the stones that are in the sea and the ocean. Okay, I think we're good. 5 minutes left. You guys want to leave early today? I think I'm on the brink of having brain damage. Okay, you see, that's our friend, G protein. We talked about that last week. You see, G protein. Who's down here? Cyclic AMP. You see cyclic AMP? Okay. All right. Exam on Monday. 25 questions, chapter 17, 25 questions, chapter 16. They will be pulled out directly from there. So you have to study all of these questions. Yes. Okay. Yeah, let me check. No,